Now's a good time to be a bargain watch hunter because there's more options out there than there ever was before. And actually the hardest thing becomes sorting the from the sweet corn. So that's what I've done for you today, rolling up my sleeves and getting elbow deep to gather up a selection of affordable watches that give you the most for the absolute least. You'll be sure to see something that'll get your appetite back. Have you ever wondered to yourself what all the fuss is about with vintage Daytona? Like, are they really all that, or is it just some elaborate prank to get you to buy an old, delicate chronograph at the price of a small boat? Well, now you can test that theory for the princely sum of just £182 with the Hoffman Racing 40, a throwback chronograph that channels a time before lung cancer had been invented and when office drinking fueled progress. The Racing 40 falls very much into the category of mechanical quartz chronographs, finding its value by fitting it with the very cheap, but also very reliable Seiko VK64. You'll find the same movement in watches like Furlan Marry, but here it's much cheaper because, well, the original Daytona wasn't a particularly well-made watch. Replicating the simple case, muted bezel and plain dial brings costs right down in comparison to the very shiny Patek aping Furlan Marry, and that's the appeal. It's the exact opposite of the understated elegance and stiff upper lip of the greatest generation, because heaven forbid those guys actually wanted to make an effort. By contrast, this watch is the perfect accompaniment to the holy t-shirt that somehow never gets thrown out. The ideal specimen for setting off your game day leather jacket that creaks like a haunted barn door and has your wife considering divorce. If you had a vintage Mustang, you'd probably have the actual vintage Daytona, but this Hoffman will go perfectly with your TR6. It's a bit bigger than the tiny vintage Daytonas at 40mm, with thickness a manageable 12mm. Water resistance is more like splash resistance at 50m, but certainly enough to manage when you get caught out on a Sunday drive with the roof down. The TR6, however, I'm not so sure about. There are a few different colour combinations available, including a rather fetching blue, but we already know that you've decided on the Panda anyway, so I won't dwell on it. They even do a mechanical version with a Seagull chronograph caliber in it, but that's 3 times the price and will definitely be enough to push her over the edge. Here's what I'll say, don't overthink it. If you're ever stuck in a quandary, simply ask yourself, what would Paul Newman do? Why, simply have your Oscar-winning actress wife gift it to you instead. Problem solved. Erebus is defined as a place of darkness in the underworld on the way to Hades, and that's basically an allegory for the authorized dealer experience, which Jody at Just One More Watch has sought to put a stop to with the Erebus Ascent. Imagine a brighter future where humanity gets along across the globe. Lambs frolic with lions, and the buying experience of a watch is fair, affordable, and easy. The Ascent is the spaniel of watch collecting, eager to please and asking very little in return. Feed it £321 worth of kibble and you'll be blessed with a lifelong companion that will do just about anything for you. Only this one won't croak it and make you cry for the first time since Marley and Me. Rising from the depths of Hades is a 39mm stainless steel case that's 11mm thick and capped with a double-dome sapphire crystal, with not just anti-reflective coating, but clear anti-reflective coating. How do I know such a specificity? Because Jody has gone out of his way to give you every possible piece of information you could ever possibly want, and then about 98% more. Lug width, 20mm, lug to lug, 44.5mm, crown, 6mm, sync to a Miyota caliber 9015. Lume, that'll be Super Luminova, BGW9 to be precise. The Ascent also hangs to the left and loves long walks on the beach. And in the sea thanks to 100 meters of water resistance. It's classified as a go-anywhere, do-anything watch, and although it won't go to your boss and ask for a pay rise, it'll certainly accompany you on pretty much any excursion. There's a choice between an O-style, wink, and a J-style, wink wink, Oyster and Jubilee bracelet, and the whole thing is offering up Grand Seiko, or whatever Citizen's fancy watch is called, let's just say Grand Citizen, vibes across the case and bracelet. Dial colours range from an entry white, black or blue enamel, veering into green, purple and orange fume for those feeling a bit more fruity, and even a helix inscribed pattern that also feels very Grand Citizen for just a little bit more cash above standard. Cravat types might also enjoy the aventurine and malachite options too. The name of the game here is to bundle in enough stuff for you to look at and involuntarily say, "That's cheap," out loud, whilst opening it up in a browser tab to look at later. If this doesn't get you to do that, then I'm afraid your soul truly is destined for Erebus. The darknessy underworldish one on the way to Hades, I mean. Learning to tell the time at school sucked because the way time is told sucks. We've actually gone backwards since the sundial, which had just one indication, adding another to split hours and minutes into a more manageable arrangement. Supposedly. And when I was 5, I didn't have the mental agility to be dealing with a whole 2 things. I was too busy concerning myself with the taste of the window. Well, here's watch brand Angles with the base 60 to bring simplicity back to time telling in the ways of our forebears, requiring just one instance of paying attention to successfully operate. The hours, displayed through a window that orbits the center of the watch, align with the minutes, offering what is essentially a digital indication that can be read in an instant. Even to this day, I have a habit of misreading the time. It's one of my weaknesses, my Achilles wrist, if you will. I am, by nature, a lazy person. The laziest. I'd give you some examples, but I can't be bothered. So when it comes to reading a watch, I vaguely look at the hour hand, and I've got a 50-50 chance of reading the correct hour or the next one along, especially in the latter stages. Minutes? Forget them. I've already lost interest by then. With the base 60, I am idiot-proofed from being able to misread the hours. It's a jumping complication, so it's never halfway between one or t'other, and when I read it, I simply can't not read the minutes too, or at the very least get a general sense of them. Even if my smooth brain misses the minutes themselves, I'll still know about how far round I had to read the hours, which gives a good estimate. Watch fans will recognise this design as the first ever devised by horological lunatics Orwerk over a quarter century ago, and on that one you simply had to guess the minutes. Time and technology have both moved on since, and now that complication can be yours for the princely sum of just £341.80. I assume that's a conversion factor from Chinese yuan. I will say that it's not a cuff slipper at 42 by 14mm, but with the budget stretching only as far as a Miyota 8215, plus the module on top, that's about all you can expect. If you've got the girth to handle it, then you're golden. And it's not like the sub £350 bracket, it's brimming with affordable Orwerk alternatives anyway. It also doubles up as a fitness watch, if you're into that sort of thing. It doesn't measure heart rate or blood flavour or whatever it is fitness watches do, but looking like a pair of old-timey weighing scales, it does remind you to keep tabs on your weight. Affordable watch bros awake have taken their dials to the wacky world of Nicholas Barome Forger, a man who puts the psycho in psychedelic with his visions of a dream I once had when I ate too much cheese and peyote before bed. Awake associates its watches with a fascination for space, and if getting 3 degrees, going on multiple scientific expeditions, enduring grueling training, and then the rigours of space itself feels like a bit too much for a Sunday afternoon, then the dare and dream will simply have to do. Contained within a 40mm matte finished grade 2 titanium case already familiar within the Awake collection, the Dare to Dream litters the dial with an array of space-themed doodles, some more down-to-earth than others, so to speak. Rocket ships and satellites are a more standard affair. The goldfish bowl wearing astrofish, less so. The shades wearing Venus flytrap with a hand-tipped tongue bellowing 2024 is a particular highlight, especially since it appears to have ingested one of the markers. That's another theme for this dial. Many of the markers have been displaced or lost entirely, joining the countless fragments of space debris hurtling through the cosmos. Turn the lights out and the astronomical adventure goes into hyperspace with a display of luminescence that rivals the Northern Lights. If the Northern Lights were a bonkers cartoon drawn by a mad Frenchman. The caseback gets its fair share of intergalactic hijinks, with 2 aliens peering out the open airlock, presumably at the human they've just released into space. That human, Ridley Scott, really makes you think. Slap it on a white rubber strap and you've got an €825 watch limited to just 50 pieces, which will have probably already gone by the time this goes out. Oh well, as they say, in space, no one can hear you join the waitlist. There's that old trope in movies where the hero is trying to escape from some sort of tumbling obstacle that's mere moments away from crushing them like a coffee bean, and yet for some reason known only to the writer and director, they don't just step to one side. That would be too easy. Or perhaps when a plot-critical piece of information needs to be passed on, the character blessed with it perhaps might not give up so easily when the hero tells them that they have no time to hear it. Or even, and this might be the worst, when a guy does something that's misinterpreted by his love interest as something heinous, and instead of just talking about it over a Big Mac meal like ordinary human beings, they go on an increasingly ridiculous escapade as he endeavours to demonstrate what an absolute card-carrying snivlet he is. There's a technical term for these kinds of plot-prolonging techniques, and it's called absolute bullshit. And it's absolute bullshit that Blancpain refuses to make a series version of the famous 50 fathoms in a size that accommodates beings a size down from the engineers of Prometheus. Makes sense why the aliens blew Ridley Scott out of the airlock now, for that extraterrestrial turd of a film. Anyway, like the movie industry, sometimes it takes going back to grassroots to get things right, and so it's been down to a guy called Bill to do it for them. This is the Tornek Rayville TR660, and yes, it looks very familiar. This is the watch Blancpain should be making if it had any interest in turning a profit. Back in 1933, President Hoover signed the Buy American Act, which required government organizations to favor American-made products. And so when the US Navy was looking for a watch, that meant the Swiss-made Blancpain 50 fathoms simply couldn't be a contender. So instead, a US company called Tornek Rayville purchased a bunch of 50 fathoms and rebranded them, and no one was any the wiser. The cheeky little sods even had the balls to use the name Rayville, a loosely disguised anagram of Blancpain's home of Villeray. I can't believe that actually worked. It couldn't be any more Scooby-Doo if Tornek Rayville was based at an abandoned funfair. Perhaps Walter White would have got away with it if only he'd called the laundromat fronting his lab "Let's Get Methy." And today, since Blancpain refuses to, Tornek Rayville is back with the TR660, which is most importantly the same size as the original at 40mm. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? It's as close to the original as you can get, really, including the branding and even the moisture indicator on the lower half of the dial, although I don't recommend testing it because it's probably not real. The crown's a little bigger as the original was too fragile, and it's a few millimeters thicker to accommodate the Seiko NE15 and to seal it to 200 meters, but otherwise it's Blancpain's $895 missed opportunity. Before you head down to the AD to beg for your next watch, make sure to pick up some humbled and blessed apparel from the store below, guaranteed to move you up the list by 10 places. Maybe. Before Gerald Genter got his first ruler in 1972, he tended towards more traditional rounded designs, with one of the least Gerald Gentery being the Universal Genève Pole Router. It's a beautiful watch, and one collectors are gagging to see returned, which it will be, and I'm sure at great cost. The alternative is a watch from Charles Berret, and whilst that might sound like a Peter Sellers alter ego, don't be deterred. The watches are actually pretty dang fantastic. Fans of the Pole Router will immediately recognise the Darth because it basically is one, and that's no bad thing. Why is it named after the interstellar child support dodger? I can only assume because of the glossy black porcelain dial, which shines like the tears in baby Luke's eyes when Daddy Anakin popped out to get some blue milk and never came back. From the front, the Darth is every bit the elegant Genter outfit, a stunningly executed display of polished surfaces, crisp textures, and deep contrast. Even the date window gets a black background, and if a watch called Charles Berret can do it, there's no excuses for anyone else. Speaking of Stephen Toast's accountant, Charles Berret does appear large and long on the dial, although the logo itself feels suitably appropriate. I'll stop you before you point out the crosshair cutting through the automatic text. Genter's did that too. What's unexpected is the concave sections lifted from the case side, a very Moseley design feature that's subtle enough not to soil the purity of the original, but adds a little extra "how's your father" to the overall feel. Maybe that's why it's called the Darth, because it's mostly made by machine and the limbs are nice and crispy. Old Charlie B hasn't sacrificed on the caliber either, fitting the Darth with a La Joux Perret G100 with an extra weighty tungsten rotor, blued screws and Geneva stripes, all contained within 38mm of sapphire capped stainless steel. It's the best affordable Pole Router alternative in the galaxy and a cunning timekeeper, and it has a good wind. Watches that look like the Blancpain 50 fathoms are just like buses. They're gradually being replaced by better, more modern examples, just like this $1,199 Tipsim 200M. Available in black or blue, the 200M opts for a more inspired by approach, taking familiar elements and combining them together in a dive watch that you won't be surprised to learn can withstand depths up to 200 meters. Let's make this into a little game. I'm going to list out the design details of this watch, and then you can play along at home and tell me what watch graves have been plundered to get onto this Frankenstein design. We'll start with the bezel, which is domed acrylic and contains a glowing 60-minute scale with a diamond 12 o'clock reference marker. For those of you playing along at home, we've already ticked off about 3 different dive watches. Then there's the dial, which features rounded markers at 3, 6 and 9, and indeed everywhere else, with the 12 o'clock marker also doubling up as a moisture indicator. That's probably another 4 dive watches, right there. Oh wait, there's the date with magnifying window too. Make that 5. The 40mm case itself goes without crown guards and is kept secure by a 5-link bracelet with twin button deployant clasp. All in all, there are about 64 different dive watches referenced here, and for those of you who don't agree that more is better, then perhaps generally avoid the US. But also, you're wrong, because the Tipsim 200M is a whole pile of lovely. Keeping the vintage feel, it's the domed acrylic crystal, and rather than white, the dial markings are gilt silver. The Swiss-made Sellita caliber SW300 is a step up from the usual SW200 we see, and captured beneath the crystal is the ghost of Jacques Cousteau. Don't leave the crown open too long or he'll escape. And here's a little treat for you. Tipsim have worked with RC Tritech, the people who make the lume for basically everybody, to create a glowing paint that naturally ages. Using a patented formula of brie, sweat and old toenails, the lume starts out a little bit off-white and will, over time, age into a delicious creamy yellow colour. Yummy. It's harder than it should be to find a steel sports watch that doesn't immediately look like a Rolex, and for those with a fondness for the Prime Meridian, the Lorca Model No. 1 GMT may be the answer you've been looking for. Lorca was founded by a man on a motorbike to offer a high-quality, affordable alternative to other more expensive watches in the same category that were not as well made. There's also some blurb about travelling and feeling all lonely and stuff, but that was boring, so I didn't really read it. The important bit is that the Lorca, which means the orca in French, probably, is a spiffing sports watch with 60s charm and, somehow, none or very few of the typical clichés. It's a fixed bezel GMT, so no clicky fun time to be had, but that's made up for by sitting the dial somewhere in between the pole router style we saw earlier and a white picket fence. It's a smaller boy at 36mm and comes with a black or silver dial, and I bet you $4 you wouldn't have guessed it came with a Soprod caliber instead of a Sellita or La Perret. Why does that matter? Well, it doesn't really, it was just surprising. You get sapphire, you get steel, you get 42 hours of power reserve, and you also, surprisingly, get 200 meters of water resistance. Considering its size, including the 11mm thickness, that's very impressive, although really it's about as useful as feathers on a frying pan. Side note, why is this type of bracelet known as a beads of rice bracelet? Rice comes in grains, not beads. Beads of rice sounds like the nicer way for the vet to tell you your dog has worms. In any case, the No. 1 GMT has a beads of rice bracelet with a micro-adjust deployant clasp. It's a watch that feels almost a bit too good for you, like if you wear it, you're letting it down. I'm not going to tell you that's not true. It probably is too good for you, but at least the £1,398 price is on the right side of friendly. Just about the only flaw I can find is the white date window in the black dial. If Chandler Bottlenose can do it, then so can you, the orca. Whether cutting snow or making dials, ground-up glass is a wonder material of many uses. Either way, the end result is pretty pricey, and so it's down to Danish watchmaker Vitrium to undercut the market with a fresh new flavour. Since the overlords of affordable enamel, Analdane, have a waitlist longer than the VFX credits for Avatar, Vitrium have something of a blue ocean to swim in. There aren't too many manufacturers out there making enamel dials because, frankly, it's stupid. Each one is very hard and very time-consuming to make, and many of them go wrong. So really, it's a fool's errand to even attempt. Regardless, Vitrium offer 4 watches within their core collection: the Arctic Blue, the Firebird, the Emerald Green, and the Tempest Grey. Each one features a unique combination of coloured enamel on a textured dial. The dial first gets engraved by hand into sterling silver, and then has the enamel painted on and fired in layers at like 1 billion degrees to melt it into a smooth, slick surface, which then gets polished up into a slippery shine. The rest of the watch remains relatively simple, a reserved 39.5mm steel case at 9.5mm tall, containing a hand-wound Sellita SW210, sandwiched between a sapphire crystal and a solid caseback, featuring an engraving of what I think is a 5-legged horse. Whilst you might think the dial markings have been created by someone who's doing their best to remember what numbers look like, they're actually from an Icelandic document from the 14th century, written by someone doing their best to remember what numbers look like. The cost of all this Danish goodness? €2,495. That's a startlingly low price for a watch with all the bits and bobs we were just talking about. Get in there soon, because before you know it, you won't be able to get one of these either. I'm really stretching your tolerance for the word cheap with this one, but believe me, the Behrens Orion One is as cheap as Dirt's homeless cousin when it comes to bonkers high horology. We've seen the insane $13,500 perigee with the orbiting moon and chain-driven hours. We've seen the super skinny $7,600 ultralight with its curved movement and retrograde displays. Now we're seeing the glass box Orion One with its barrel display and upturned movement at just $3,600. Behrens describe themselves as having imagination with no boundaries, and I believe that to be true because every single watch they make looks like an HR Giga acid trip. The Orion One is no exception, a futuristic combination of a greenhouse and the intergalactic freighter Nostromo. Not even Ridley Scott could dream up a watch this mad, never mind build it for just $3,600. To put things into perspective, that's a very similar price to the Mad One. What the Mad One doesn't get, however, is a completely bespoke caliber shrouded in glass with a cylinder 24-hour display and a crank-wound crown. Everything that could be unexpected about this watch is, and most unexpected is the curved time display at the front. Hours are on the left, minutes on the right, rotating forwards to be read off the central markers. The minutes get 5 hashes so the exact minute can be calculated. Dead center is a second subdial and up top right is the date, both of which are nestled in an array of gears that looks like how my brain feels when I'm calculating a tip. In a word, the Orion One is quite simply mental. There is no reason for it to exist, and yet it does, for far less than expected. The number of people for whom this watch is relevant you could count on Boris Yeltsin's left hand, but nevertheless its existence benefits us all, even if we don't get one. That's because it encourages everyone else to try a bit harder, do a bit more, and not just make the same old crap over and over again with an extra zero on the price tag. For that, Behrens, we salute you. That's it for this roundup of top 10 cheap watches. What's your favourite bargain buy right now? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and thanks especially to my wonderful Patreons, who you can join via the link in the description. And remember, the best investment in life is a Walmart uniform. Then you can walk out with anything you want for free. See you next time.